coming out. We're really excited to have our distinguished guests here today. I think we had a panel last year that talked about some of the best practices around containers. We thought for this year, what would be really interesting now that these technologies have been around for a little bit, for a little while, to have an opportunity to talk to some of our folks that are working, within the government, for the government, from the government, to talk about our where we are in adopting containers, what some of the lessons learned have been, and some of the challenges that have been faced, and what we see in the future in terms of the government being able to continue to adopt these technologies and to sort of enhance how government is doing development in a similar fashion to what I think we've been hearing a lot about from the commercial industry. So with that said, we'll kind of go through that. We'll try to save some time for questions. So if you think of things, we'll save a little bit of time at the end here for questions. But I'd like to give an opportunity to start us off for each of the panelists to introduce themselves. Josh?
I'm Josh Boyd. I work for Booz primarily standing up containers for almost production at GSA right now for the last 2 years almost, I guess. And then also supporting other clients and standing up how they're going to do containers and how they're going to do DevOps transformations in their organizations.
Hi, I'm Naveen Vembar. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the GSA. Those transformations that Josh just mentioned are sort of within my space, and I'm trying to move a lot of folks in those directions as we go forward.
I'm Sarah Fodden. I'm the Verification Program Portfolio Chief at USCIS, and I manage the two applications, E-Verify and Save. You might have heard of E-Verify. We are currently in the middle of our modernization efforts, and we have fully transitioned to DevOps at this point. We have a fully automated pipeline and are using containers already in production.
And I'm Leo Garciga. I'm the Joint Improvised Threat Defeat Organization, J6, and the Chief Technology Officer. And we've been on a path really moving to DevOps over the last year in DoD. In an interesting place right now, some pieces in production, some pieces not in production. But we've been trying to really pave the way to do this on classified side across multiple networks.
That's great. I think that actually kind of leads into our first question, which is, what goals have you all established to this point for adoption of containers, and where are you today?
I can hit it first. Okay. So we're in an interesting spot right now. So I think when this all started, so about a year ago for me, I said, hey, I organizationally spent about 2 years trying to slim down how long it was taking for us to really push stuff out to production. And what does that really mean, right? So when I first got there about 3 years ago, it was around 92 days, right? And I said, hey, that's not acceptable. Let's really figure out how to push this down to under 30 days. So long 2-year train, right? A lot of stuff happened, a lot of process work, a lot of infrastructure work. And we started averaging around 23 days. So for my DoD folks, that's right, 23 days, that's fully accredited and on production. But that's not good enough, right? Our customer was demanding even quicker speeds. So we really started looking across the space on what was available. And I think with the reduction in especially the threat footprint with containers, and really just the ability to push out features right from your get instance, commit, and go to production, that was a no-brainer for us, and we started down our path. Right now, we've pushed out one capability, a small one as our initial kind of production proof of concept. So the technology's there. I think the biggest challenge for us has been really the people piece, getting everyone on board. We talk about immutability on the infrastructure side. It's taken me 6 months to get everybody on board to understand what that really means and how it improves our threat footprint. And that's really where we are right now. And we're looking at the next 90 days really going with our larger capabilities being full up in production from dev through prod.
Okay, so we went to get our approval for our level 1 program back in September of 2015. And by December of 2015, we went live in production with the first piece of our application. The first application that we built did not use the container technologies, and we are adding it to that now. But the second and third and fourth pieces of the modernized application that we're building using a microservices approach all use container technology. And we recently achieved continuous deployment, which was a huge deal for us. We are now, and for anyone that doesn't know what that means, we're now pushing to production automatically once it passes through the pipeline. So we're promoting to production numerous times a day with code. And containers have definitely helped in that. For us, one of the big things was we wanted to reduce the time it took to build up the application and the servers in order to do this. And this cut our time by 2/3. And we had a pretty fast pipeline in the first place. It was about 45 minutes before, and now it's down to like, I think, 12 minutes, which is really fast, obviously. It also saves us dollars because you can deploy multiple things on one server, and they're walled off from each other, so you don't have those hardware implications like we used to have. We are in a cloud environment already, and one of the good things about using the container technology is the ability to, if we absolutely had to move E-Verify to a different, we're in AWS now, but if we wanted to move them to Google or Microsoft or Azure or something like that, we could do it pretty easily. We wouldn't have the automation because we've used a lot of the stuff provided by AWS, but we would be able to do it really quickly. So that is another great benefit that we've used.
So within the GSA, as Josh was mentioning, right, there's an almost there in terms of getting all the way up to production. But we actually have been working on a platform for some large-scale capabilities in the integrated reward environment. So SAM.gov, FPDS, those are moving in that direction, and I think we're very much near an ATO for a production environment for those that are using some of those container technologies. And I think the key and the goal that I have right now is moving that out to the other parts of the agency instead of just containing it within that one's application space, and working on pipelines that are appropriate for those other applications. Right now, that 90-day process that Leo mentioned is where we live for the vast majority of the applications that we have out there. And most of those applications aren't necessarily right now even appropriate to move to sort of the microservices model, the 12-factor model, all of that stuff. So that's the direction we're going in right now. So we have these big applications that are being demonstrative of a way that we can actually do this work. And we're laying down the appropriate pipelines that we need, and I'm working with our security teams to say, okay, so can we agree that this is now a 2-week process instead of a 90-day effort, right?
Just so you know, Naveen, we started with a large legacy application and we ripped off small pieces of it. So you can do that with a larger application. You just have to figure out the appropriate piece to rip off that you can move into the cloud and then use containers.
Yeah, that's actually...
And still connect back to the old application using like a hybrid model at first.
Yep, and that's actually a lot of what we did with the integrated reward environment was we broke that out. We looked for the transformative elements of that because that was actually a major need there. And we're actually looking at how we might be applying that in some of our mainframe transformations as we go forward. So.
Yay, mainframes.
So it's interesting you talk about the ATO because I think the platform ATO is today, tomorrow.
That's
right for production. So that's cool. So the story at GSA for containers is kind of interesting because we started with just Docker Engine. Like there was no Docker UCP, there was no Docker Enterprise. So we provisioned Docker infrastructure for each application on demand through kind of a self-service portal, and that would take a few hours to stand that up for each app. And then Docker UCP came along, and we deployed that and changed our architecture a little bit to have a cluster where we could deploy everything. And all of a sudden, you're deploying new applications in minutes instead of hours, compared to before having Docker at all, it could take months, years to provision just infrastructure for your new app to live on. Right?
Literally.
And the other cool thing is that GSA was the first federal customer of Docker Trusted Registry. So we've been very much, at the early adopter pace, which is neat for government, right? And being able to do that. At other organizations, they've got Docker in production, but they don't have necessarily as big of a spread of teams and applications and things like that they're targeting.
So we talked a lot about the tools and the technology that we've been able to adopt. Leo, I think I heard you mention people. So from the panel, what experiences have you had in terms of people or process or organizational types of change to coincide with the tools that you're pushing forward?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, right? So I think the technology piece, right, and I tell folks all the time, right, when I talk to other folks in the government, I'm like, hey, the tech piece is actually pretty easy. I give the example, right? My 14-year-old daughter can do some of this stuff, so it's not as impressive as it used to be. I think the big challenge we've seen is, right, so this is really transformation on a large scale across an enterprise, right? So, hey, we've been doing it this way for, 24 months, Leo. Now you want me to do it X way? There's no way I'm doing that. And that's really been where the challenge has been, right? Fundamentally changing the way you look at how you develop capability, how you monitor the capabilities you have from a security perspective or just from a deployment perspective, how you take something as simple as the traditional configuration management process and completely re-wicker that to work in a DevOps environment. That's a fundamentally different way of doing business. And that's probably been our biggest challenge is getting everybody on board. Some of it's required some lifting and shifting of personnel. A lot of it has been really re-looking at our processes and starting from scratch, right, to get there. I will tell you from a DoD perspective, the bigger challenge has been is articulating to the community outside our organization really how this meets the intent of the NIST cybersecurity framework, how it meets the intent of the risk management framework within DoD, and that's been a big challenge, right? Internally, it's been a challenge, but I think externally, it's been a pretty big challenge. I think you got very disruptive people sitting on this stage who right now are really paving the way on the policy piece and on how you operationalize these capabilities in government. And that piece right there is that next stage, right, to get the rest of, whether it be the Department of Defense or the rest of the federal government on board, is really being able to shape that in a way that can be communicated out to others.
Yeah, I think I mean that security piece is one of the biggest sort of movers, but I think that we're sitting in this environment when we're talking about being disruptive, where just the idea of sort of ephemerality and immutability, right, is very hard to explain to folks, and sort of really trying to work through some of these issues of wait, you have a thing that runs for 5 minutes then disappears. How is that possible? What's the value of it? Why would you do that? That's actually, those are the sort of changes that, at a very basic level of, like even, that's
Chaos monkey.
Or chaos monkey, right? Or
But you
even
want to shut things down on
right,
purpose?
exactly. Like
In production?
even sort of stepping back to like, what is a cloud for, right? What is the difference there, right? So, that whole, pets not cattle thing, right? We've got a lot of pets. We've got a lot of pets, and getting people to sort of let that go and understand that there's going to be fundamentally different ways to do things, that we shouldn't be building out these like, we shouldn't be treating containers as VMs, right? Mm-hmm. That's a surprisingly cultural thing to explain, not a technical thing, and what that actually means, right? Like when we're doing that, right? We tend to want to recreate the pain of going to hardware because it feels safer. And so how do we get people out of that has been one of the biggest things, which then leads to, and then you have a container thing that goes on top.
Right.
Yeah. So that's like the trap of DevOps. So like as technologists, we want to focus on tools, right?
Yeah.
And so when you are an organization and you start focusing on tools first, like your software development team, they start doing tools, start doing DevOps, and then they hit that wall and like, I can't move any further. I can't do anything else inside my organization. And now all of a sudden, I need to think about culture now because nobody else wants to work with me, right?
Yeah, and I think, right, so I call that the DevOps to staging problem, right, all the time. People are like, we're doing DevOps, and I'm like, great, how many tools have you put out in production? None. I'm like, well, okay.
Not actually doing DevOps.
Right, so and I think that's important when we talk about this, right, culturally, is having a conversation that, great, so you have a CI/CD pipeline, but there's these two other C's that go there, which is continuous authorization, i.e., tools are scanned and they're accredited to go on the network, and then continuous monitoring, which is that next piece, right? That gets you to real DevOps. So how do you have that conversation across the enterprise so everyone's on the same page? Because you can't just build a container and drop it off, right?
So I guess I sort of have the advantage here because I worked in the security shop and I built the ongoing authorization program for like 4 years prior to taking on this role. And so we had already implemented a fully automated continuous monitoring program at USCIS. And so it was really just a matter of hooking in those security tools into our pipeline so that all that's happening automatically. Patches are downloaded every time we release to production. It's already automated. And then like changing the mindset wasn't that hard because that's where I came from. And so that was the mindset that was already there. So on my side, culturally, I think the bigger thing that I see is outside of USCIS, there seems to be a lot of cultural problems where their agencies are just not there yet. And part of that, I think, is, the whole security thing. I keep hearing this over and over that people think that moving to the cloud is less secure than being at a data center, when in all reality, you're probably not very secure in your data center right now. And that's probably the truth. And it actually, being in the cloud actually enables you to be able to do things more quickly and respond to security issues much more quickly. And there are way more tools that you can automatically use that can provide added layers of security. And so if you just change your mentality from thinking about the cloud as this whole other thing, it's really just another data center that has additional tools. And so you're accepting an ATO just for the data center pieces, the physical controls, et cetera, and then you're adding extra security controls on top of that, and mitigating the risk in that way. So I think there needs to be a mentality shift in general about how we think about these things.
And I think, we were running into that. I mean, we have a fantastic CISO at the GSA. He's really willing to sort of work with us and lean forward. And in this, and I keep saying DevOps, and I really should be saying DevSecOps, that whole thing, right? But I think even so, right, getting people to trust automation and the output of automation, that's also another element of this, right? So even, we culture as tied to tool, right? Like that is a real thing, right? To be able to say, but I didn't look at that myself.
And what's interesting about that is that the automation actually brings you a more enhanced security because it's more predictable, right? Right now in a data center, you have all kinds of different configurations in each environment, whereas when you implement containers, you're gonna tighten that, shore that up so tightly that production really does look like your dev environment.
Yeah, and that's a big thing. Funny, I was just thinking here. So when you look at folks who are going down this path in the federal government, more and more I see it tends to be folks who have a security background already, or who are AOs on the network like I am, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all chasing the same thing, which is how do I take my risk surface and minimize it, right, while still pushing out capability as fast as I can. And it becomes more and more interesting as you look at that, and as you look at, well, what skill set do I need to bring on board, right, and kind of institute culturally that it does need to be a security heavy, right? You can't have just a manager who sits up there as a CISO. You really need an expert who's got some experience in production and really understands what that end state is, to be able to move to technologies like this, so it's a little bit more holistic. And that's a big part of it.
So it sounds like, I think in some ways that we've been ragging a bit on security, but what's fun is I also have this problem sometimes with actually just straight up the developer teams, right? Like, how do we make this easy for them, right? I've gotten into discussions with folks about, well, what does it mean to automate something, right? It doesn't just mean that you've written an Ansible script, right? That's not sufficient, right? There's a pipeline, there's a flow, and those things have to be respected, because that's what gets you through those security gates, those deployment gates, those authorization gates, and that's actually also an interesting thing to sort of flow through as well.
So containers make things easier for developers and for security, right? So for developers, it makes it easier in that I don't have to stand up a development environment anymore, right? It's just there. So I don't have these problems of like managing libraries anymore. For my 5 different applications that use 5 different versions of like Maven or something. Yeah. But for security, it's important, with Docker specifically, the security tools that they bubble up lets you, like, I can restrict what system calls a container can make now. Like, I have no capability to do that with anything else. I can't do that with a jar, Java, .NET. Like, I can't limit my application in the same way. So now I can control at a very low level what that application can do now, which has a lot of power. And once you start exploring that with security, you start getting on board, and the new scary thing starts being less scary. Yeah, that's actually been something that people have been buying into pretty significantly. Is, oh, okay, containers let me do this thing. That's great. Like, and as developers get introduced to it, I think they've been very happy with this idea. But I think what's going to be interesting, right, is how as we go forward and as this whole container space matures, I think increasingly I think a lot of those developers would like to see even less of those mechanics exposed to them, right? I mean, PaaS are awesome, right? And really sort of getting bought into that PaaS idea is going to be a really key thing.
Well, let's take a quick survey just in the audience. How many of you are federal government employees here today? So actually, pretty substantial number. So
Very cool.
for the government reps here who might be looking to adopt, like to get started in containers, like what advice do you all have for them? Like where should they start? You all talked about, getting all the processes in place, starting with the tools. Is there maybe one or two key lessons learned that you would say, hey, if I were to do it again, or for your organization, you should maybe start this way?
Yeah. So, and I'll be honest on this, right? There's no template. There really isn't, right? So a lot of us are really we're moving out on these technologies, we're moving out on the methodology, and we're learning as we go, and we're really building that framework, right, on what that looks like inside the government. I mean, that's the honest answer. I will say this. I like the slide up there that we saw earlier that talks about, hey, you could do this with legacy apps. You could do this with just microservice type of apps, new stuff you're doing. I think you really have to look at what capabilities you need to have a high level of reliability on, right, and push out changes to it fast and start there if you've got the infrastructure to do it, and just see how it goes, right? Do a proof of concept, really shape that. Talk to folks like us who've kind of done this, right, to get at least a framework to work around. And I say that, right, because every AO is going to be different. Every CIO is going to be different on their approach. And some folks may not have capability that they need that level of push out all the time at that speed. So it's something to think about. But start off with really what's the, from a command level or an agency level, what are we going to get out of this? I will tell you that just on our initial metrics, both speed, obviously that's a no-brainer. But as we look at how we reshaping the workforce and how we provide the capability out to our customer, we're starting to watch the cost savings come in very quickly, right? Yeah. And that's the big sell besides security. But I will tell you that my biggest lesson learned is go talk to folks who've done this. I spent a lot of time talking to folks in industry who are already doing this. And not your typical integrators here in the DC area, right? So go out, talk to Citibank, talk to Humana, right? Talk to all these folks out there who are doing this, because I think we're living what they've already lived in some instances, and the tips that they've given us really have let us build a pretty robust framework to start from.
Well, and also if you reach out to us, we can give you like our hardening, for example, that you might need for your containers. Yeah. And that way you're not reinventing that wheel. And definitely I can put you in touch with our developers that could certainly give you additional lessons learned if you need that assistance and you're ready to start deploying containers.
Right.
So I think that if I'm going to own up to an error that I think I made, and I didn't push far out sufficiently, was I didn't metrize things sufficiently, and I think we're still early in that, right? So it's very hard to both sort of measure what we've succeeded with, but also substantiate those successes with the folks that need to be bought into it. So you being able to say to the day, like, oh, this is what our average deployment time is. You know what? I can't right now. I couldn't do that, right? Yeah. And that's actually a really big thing, because I think that also that ties to, beyond sort of deployment time, right? I really do want to be able to measure the heterogeneity of the environments that we have out there, because that's what containerization is really meant to help solve. And that's something that we're really not in a place to tell you about right now. And so those are things that I would say that I would own, but that we're moving towards and actually saying, oh yeah, that's actually a thing that we have to be able to do and say.
So we at at least on my team at USCIS, we use metrics to drive value for every single thing that we do. So we are always tracking, okay, whenever we start some kind of new project, we always track, okay, here's like what we're doing today and how long it takes, or, even for the application stuff, it's all value and metrics based. Mm-hmm. So it really does help to add that in, because then you can, you baseline it and then you can show the gradual improvement. But another piece of advice that I would give is to just start out small and don't be afraid to fail, because you will fail, and we've all failed at something, and it's okay to fail. Just fail quickly and then redivert and come up with a new game plan and then move forward from there.
Yeah, I basically end every kickoff meeting, and this is going to go wrong, and they go.
Yeah. No, but I think that's important when we kind of our first attempt, right? Even on the technology, and we had a couple of failures, right? Like, hey, we thought we had the right answer. This makes perfect sense. And now as we've matured a little bit, I think even especially on the kind of process and how do you really accept the risk, right? From my perspective as a guy who's signing off on stuff going out production, I see it all the time, right? Where I'm like, hey, this is a great idea. This is exactly what thresholds we should think about for this capability. And as soon as we push it out, I'm like, okay, maybe that wasn't a good idea. Let's roll that back. But the speed that you can do that at, right, is what makes the difference. But there's going to be a lot of that. There's going to be a lot of trial and error because it is fundamentally changing the way that you deploy capability.
So what's going to be interesting at your agency if you want to do containers is when you decide to do a POC, you're going to find out everything else that's broken in your organization, right? So you're going to find out, I can't get infrastructure deployed for 9 months, or I don't have RHEL 7 approved, and that's going to take 6 months. So I've been in an organization where it took 9 months to get a POC up of OpenShift, right? Because of all the processes they have to go through. So we often see containers come about as like a DevOps transformation or a cloud strategy, or even like Agile. But if any of those things are broken right now, containers aren't going to fix that problem. But they are going to show you very quickly where those problems are.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think that's the first thing. I think in the first 6 months, we found out a lot of stuff that we're like, oh, that's not broken. That's working perfect. Look how fast we can deploy. And as soon as we started having a conversation about containers and really taking that CI/CD piece to the next level, we found out there was a lot of broken things, right? Things we hadn't even thought about. We're like, oh, we don't really even have a way to assess that right now. And there was a lot of time spent there. And that's something, right? That's where it gets back to. You really got to build that coalition. If you don't own everything, right, and you got to hand it over to somebody else, is really build that coalition. I'll say one more lesson learned that I had, which was interesting. I really thought that my ops guys were going to be all over this. Yeah, right. That's the biggest pushback I got all the way through. Everything was, oh, this is just like VMware. This is just VMware. I'm like, no, it's not. But working through those conversations, I think, but probably the first 90, 120 days, I spent a lot of time teaching versus deploying capability and architecting and planning, right, to get everybody on the same page. But I think that was a big piece, and a cautionary note for me is you really got to have, you really got to push out there. Here's really what this means for everybody, and get people, I think, off the ledge a little bit of I'm going to lose my job type of mentality, and think my job is going to change, right? I'm going to be a bigger enabler to the mission than I am right now because I'll be able to do more, right, with what I've got today.
Yeah, it's funny, I see a lot of people who are changing their titles to DevOps when they were previously Ops. And I think they're forgetting the dev part of the DevOps piece, especially when I know they're still operations. But I'm glad that they're doing that and they're thinking about it because I think that that's the right step in the right direction, right? It's going to take some time to kind of change and transition to being a DevOps person, which is very different from just being an operations person. Even if you are scripting some things, that's not the same as a full DevOps model where your entire infrastructure is automated. And
Yeah, I've definitely heard a lot of, we've been doing DevOps for years.
Right.
I'm just going to nod. I'm not going to speak.
So is the same as microservices.
Yeah, oh yeah, no, that too. We've been doing microservices for years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to save a few minutes here in case folks in the audience had any questions. Does anyone have a question from the audience? I see a hand in the back.
fellow USCIS.
Looks great.
Hello. What are you guys' opinions about the new NIST publication that just came out on application container security, NIST SP 800-190?
Actually,
seen it, so.
I haven't seen it either. Sorry.
I'm glad that they're providing guidance.
Yeah.
Because every organization is doing it differently right now.
Yeah.
And kind of guessing at what they should be doing.
Yeah, so I've taken an initial look at it. Interesting, right? A lot of the stuff I think we've inherently done right now looks similar. I will tell you in the DoD space, there's a little bit of a different challenge in the sense that I got to have the rest of the enterprise catch up, right? DISA, folks like that. So I think there's still some room. But I think that's right. Oh my God, there's acknowledgement, right, in the community, and we're going to actually put this into some framework that everybody in the government can understand. I think that's a great first step.
Yeah, I'm actually USCIS as well. I'm one of the lead security engineers.
That's cheating.
Next question over here.
Coming to you. Hi, do you guys have any advice for enabling DevOps between developers and operations when the contract may be prohibitive?
I will answer this in my way. Quite a bit of experience out here. Yes. And I think to my federal partners in this, I would say write better contracts, number one. But I think, I mean,
yeah. Same thing.
but in all seriousness, yes, right? So I would say to, and not so much to the integrators, but on the federal government side is there's a partnership between us and our integrators, right? And part of that is being mature enough to be able to do service level agreements across contracts, right? And once you really do that and spend quite a bit of time of that, does start to alleviate some of those challenges. That's the approach that I've taken over the last 3-4 years. It's taken a while to get everybody on board with that, but I think that is from a contractual perspective the right way to get at that problem, or write better contracts.
So on my program, we started with we have one contract for operations and one contract for the actual application, managing the application itself. And typically that works with your operations team is the only one that actually deploys into prod, et cetera. For all of the new stuff that we've built and all the new contracts that we're putting out, it includes cloud engineers, which are our DevOps folks. And so we'll quickly be out of that realm where we have both. But in the intermediary, we have actual feds that are very capable engineers that sort of fill the gap in the short term, and they're amazing. We're very lucky to have those technical folks that help out there. But that's,
Something we're trying to start is like figuring out how to embed like a platform engineer with your application teams. But you still need to figure out like not requiring a Fed to be an intermediary in every discussion between different contractors, because I can't just have somebody sitting there all day waiting for the platform engineer to talk to the dev team, right? But some of the contracts we've had
our
require
contractors
that now,
talk to
right?
each other all the time. And I make sure that that's an expectation that everybody's going to work together. And if one team fails, including one contractor, we all fail together.
Yeah, that's one key thing that we've had to do. The SLAs are another one, but actually, I think I want to hammer one point that you made, which is that Fed technical experience is also very important here.
Very important.
If you're purely have a set of non-technical technical feds, it doesn't matter if you have one contractor or 20, it's still going to have a problem when you're trying to do a DevOps, like really create a DevOps mentality, because there is an engineering element to DevOps, which isn't, if you talk about Agile, that's more of a management thing, but DevOps, there't a real engineering thinking to it. So having that skill set has been very key.
Yeah.
Any final words as we wrap up?
No.
Well, you guys know I can
Go
always
forth and
talk.
prosper. You can do it.
Yeah, feel free to
I saw a few other hands too. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Is that all right?
Perfect. Thank you.
This is probably more addressed to Leo, working in DoD side. How did you address the issues with DevOps when probably your development is happening in an unclassed environment and your production probably being in a classified environment?
This is the best reason to have containers, right? So I'll start off with a little bit different than the traditional model. So I also have a fully unclassed dev environment. We are pushing stuff up through our guard, which is interesting now, right? So we saw a little bit about kind of getting those keys and those hashes against those images, right? This really makes life a lot easier from a development perspective. In fact, I think that one of the pluses, unintended pluses for us, by really moving this route and really building the relationship with Docker, was it does give us a more robust and clean way to do full-on development on the unclass, at least as much as we can, right? And bring that capability up to the high side in a seamless manner where you could still get pedigree of that image or the source code you've actually built. So now, instead of having to do all that scanning and replicating that back up on another network, right, we're really doing it once, and it's slimming it down. So if anything, from a technology perspective, it's really allowed us to become more efficient and how we push capability out. And as the AO on my network, what it actually is finally done is I don't physically have to go look at code now all the time, right? And try to do some kind of hash deconfliction from coming across networks. Again, right, so that's pipeline on Nipper, pipeline on the classified networks, right? Other organizations, that's a little bit more challenging if they're doing development off-site, but back to you have a container, right? So that can be delivered to you and then go through your process on the end class. Does that answer your question? Because this could be a long conversation.
Yeah, but I'd like to talk to you a little bit after.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll do this. I'll ask a question in closing. You all talked about probably short-term targets for folks getting started, and just sort of in closing, you talk about coalitions, right? What recommendations would you make to folks who are getting started? What does a coalition look like for success? Like, what have you kind of gone through? What people do you need in the room to do it right from the start?
I'll start from our side, right? So from our, the most successful, some of the most successful work that we've done, right, what required executive buy-in, just to say like, yes, we're going to go do this thing. But then we had to put the security folks, the ops folks, the dev folks all in the same room with a business lead to say this is the thing we're trying to accomplish, and all agree that we're going in this direction together, right? And that has been how we've been able to shape sort of technology implementation as well as policy and process going forward.
As long as you identify your path to production and all those people who are gatekeepers, those are all the people you need in the room.
Right. I mean, I think one of the things, but I think one of the things that executive has to say, and this is what I've said in rooms or whatever else, is you all can do this thing. You all are going to have the path. Like our jobs as executives is to clear those paths forward for you, but you have to do it, and you have to do it in this manner, right? Like,
I guess it was a little easier for us because we already had, CIO buy-in. I mean, he was like telling us to do it. Yeah. So we were lucky in that regard. But I definitely think CIO and executive buy-in is the most important thing that you can have. And after that, it gets relatively easy. You're still going to have to go through the gates, and you have to work with security. But as long as your security group is forward-thinking like you are, then I think it's more of a dance and a how do we together secure this to enable us to do it, instead of no, you can't do it because of X, Y, and Z. This is how you can do it, is how you say that and how you frame that answer. And so that's we have a very forward-thinking security shop at this point, and so for us. Yeah. It wasn't, and then for change management and all of the SELC processes, we had sort of already tackled that as well. And so, but we were one of the first teams to reach team managed deployments. And so we were already just deploying when we wanted to, and then checking in with them every 6 months to let them know kind of what we were working on. So I think, hitting all those hurdles up front is definitely going to help to pave the way and make it easier for you to really be able to like implement technologies much faster, like this one, which is a great technology. Yeah.
So I would say yes to all of that, right? So you got to have the players that are in your path to production, which is basically a supply chain. I think we call it P2P. I will tell you, for us, my experience was, get ready for this shocking statement I'm about to make. The customer, right? So the customer really drove this. It's unbelievable, right? So in our instance, the warfighter said, I need it now, right? I don't have time to wait 18 months, 12 months for you to do a simple feature change. That's unacceptable. I think that was a part of a coalition. And I think a lot of folks will find when you go out to your customer, who's getting the services of the application you're building or the capability you're deploying, right? They're the #1 advocate for you, right? Because they want their life to be easier, and they want their changes to get done, right? So make sure you make them part of this process, right? Because they're the ones that, when you start getting whether it be the pushback or the lack of understanding, they will drive others to help you, right? To become your enablers. So don't forget about those folks, because those are the folks that really are going to make stuff happen for you.
I feel like having a dedicated product owner conversation is set for another day. Yeah. But yeah, I agree. That's probably one of your most important things that you can do is have a dedicated product owner.
Well, I know we're about time here, so I just wanted to thank each of the panelists. I hope this was helpful to everyone. And I really appreciate each of you sharing your stories. I'm sure that all of us would like to continue to hear how things are going. So, thanks.